August 15, 1973. Golden Harvest Studios, Hong Kong. Ray Chen watched Jackie Chan take the hardest punch of his life, not from Bruce Lee, from a shadow in the corner who wasn't supposed to be there. 30 people witnessed it. The cameras were rolling. But when the film was developed the next morning, that footage had vanished. Someone made sure of it. 3 days later, Bruce Lee was dead. For 50 years, Ray carried the weight of what he saw. The studio buried the story. The witnesses scattered across the globe. And Jackie Chan never spoke about that punch again. But last Tuesday, a package arrived at Ray's apartment. Inside, a film reel labeled the truth about August 15th. Someone kept a copy. Someone remembered. Someone wants Ray to remember too. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Ray's hands trembled as he held the film reel, the metal canister cold against his palms like a piece of evidence that could damn him. The label, handwritten in careful block letters, seemed to pulse under his apartment's dim lighting. The truth. About August 15th. He'd been running from that date for 5 decades. The package had no return address, no postmark he could decipher, just his name, Raymond Chen, written in the same deliberate handwriting as the reel's label. Someone knew where to find him in this cramped Chinatown apartment above Mrs. Wu's herb shop, where he'd hidden among dusty film canisters and forgotten movie posters since 1985. Ray set the reel on his cluttered desk, pushing aside stacks of preservation reports and correspondence from small-time directors seeking his archival services. His ordinary life, cataloging old films, restoring damaged footage, helping film students piece together Hong Kong cinema's golden age, a quiet existence built on the foundation of one enormous lie. The 16mm projector sat in the corner like a sleeping beast. Ray hadn't used it in months, preferring digital transfers for his clients. But this reel demanded proper respect, the kind that only came from threading actual celluloid through mechanical gates, hearing the familiar whir of sprockets catching frame after frame. He'd been 28 that day at Golden Harvest, young enough to believe the film industry's promises, old enough to coordinate complex stunt sequences that made actors look like gods. Bruce Lee trusted him. The entire crew trusted him. And when that shadow moved in the corner, when that figure stepped forward and threw the punch that sent Jackie Chan sprawling, Ray had made a choice that haunted every day since. The punch wasn't in the script. Jackie's reaction wasn't acting. The blood on his lip was real. Ray remembered Bruce's face in that moment, the confusion that flickered across his features before his expression hardened into something Ray had never seen before. Fear. Not the controlled intensity Bruce brought to his performances, but genuine terror. As if Bruce suddenly understood something the rest of them couldn't see. "Cut!" Bruce had called, but his voice carried a tremor that made everyone freeze. The man who threw the punch had vanished by the time Bruce reached Jackie. No one could explain who he was or how he'd gained access to the closed set. The studio security footage from that day mysteriously malfunctioned. The crew members who'd been standing closest suddenly couldn't remember details clearly, but Ray remembered everything. The stranger's face, angular and scarred along the left cheek, the way he moved like a trained fighter, not some random intruder, the cold smile he'd given Ray before melting back into the shadows between the equipment racks. Most haunting of all, Bruce had known the man. Ray was certain of it. The recognition in Bruce's eyes lasted only a second, but it was unmistakable. 3 days later, Bruce Lee collapsed in Betty Tingpei's apartment. Cerebral edema, the doctors said. A reaction to painkillers. Case closed. Ray threaded the mysterious reel through the projector with practiced movements, muscle memory overriding his anxiety. The apartment's shadows seemed to lean closer as he flicked on the machine. The familiar clicking filled the silence, each frame advancing toward revelations he'd prayed would stay buried. The first images flickered to life on the portable screen he'd erected between his kitchen and living room. Golden Harvest Stage 3, exactly as Ray remembered it. Bruce in his yellow tracksuit, Jackie in street clothes for the scene they'd been rehearsing. The camera angle was wrong, though. This wasn't from any of the official cameras. Someone had been filming from the equipment area, hidden among the lights and reflectors. Ray's breath caught as he recognized himself in the frame's edge, clipboard in hand, watching the action with the intensity of a man whose reputation rode on every punch, looking perfect. Younger, hopeful, believing the biggest challenge in his life was making Kung Fu look real for audiences worldwide. The scene played out exactly as his memory preserved it. Bruce demonstrating the choreography, Jackie nodding, understanding, then movement in the background, a figure emerging from shadows that shouldn't have concealed anyone. But this footage continued running when it should have stopped. Ray watched his younger self step forward, saw Bruce's hand signal for the cameras to stop rolling. Yet this hidden camera kept capturing everything, the stranger approaching, Jackie turning with surprise, the punch that connected with devastating precision, and there, Bruce's face as he recognized the attacker. Not confusion this time. Recognition, followed immediately by a resignation that chilled Ray's blood. The stranger looked directly into the hidden camera before disappearing, as if he knew someone was recording. As if he wanted this moment preserved. Ray's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Now you know someone else was watching. Meet me tomorrow at the place where it all began. Come alone, or everyone learns what role you played in Bruce's death. His hands shook as he read the message again. Someone had been planning this moment for 50 years, and they weren't finished with Raymond Chen yet. The projector's mechanical clicking echoed in the sudden silence as the reel spun to its end, leaving Ray staring at a blank white screen that seemed to pulse with accusation. The stranger's scarred face lingered in his vision like an afterimage burned into his retinas. 50 years, and those cold eyes remained as vivid as the moment they'd looked directly into a hidden camera, directly at him across decades of carefully constructed denial. Ray's apartment felt smaller now, the walls pressing closer with each labored breath. The familiar scent of Mrs. Wu's dried herbs drifting up from below usually comforted him, but tonight it carried undertones of something medicinal, something that reminded him of hospital corridors and the antiseptic smell that had clung to his clothes after identifying Bruce's body. Come alone, or everyone learns what role you played in Bruce's death. The words glowed on his phone screen with malevolent patience. Ray set the device aside and moved to his window, pulling back the heavy curtain to peer down at Grant Avenue. Chinatown never truly slept, but at this hour the foot traffic had thinned to late-shift workers and insomniacs seeking comfort in all-night dim sum. His reflection ghosted over the scene below, an old man haunted by choices made when the world seemed simpler, when right and wrong weren't separated by such treacherous gray spaces. He'd built this quiet life deliberately, one careful year at a time. The film archive work let him stay connected to Hong Kong's golden age without having to relive it directly. His clients knew him as the meticulous archivist who could restore damaged Shaw Brothers footage or locate rare outtakes from Golden Harvest Productions. They didn't know about the nightmares or the way his hands still shook whenever he saw Jackie Chan's face on magazine covers. The apartment bore witness to his careful isolation. Movie posters covered walls where family photos should hang. Film canisters occupied the space most people reserved for mementos and treasures. Only one photograph sat on his desk, not of family or friends, but of Bruce in a moment of genuine laughter during a break between takes. Bruce alive, vital, unaware that death was measuring his final days with calculating precision. Ray touched the glass over Bruce's face, remembering the weight of keeping secrets. After the funeral, after the reporters had finally stopped calling, after the conspiracy theories had calcified into pop culture mythology, Ray had made his peace with carrying the truth alone. Better that than destroying the people who trusted him, like Jenny. His sister lived in Oakland now with her grown children, grandchildren who called him Uncle Ray and delighted in his stories about old Hong Kong movies. They knew nothing about the 3 days between the incident on Stage 3 and Bruce's death. 3 days when Ray had helped arrange meetings, delivered messages, and facilitated conversations he'd pretended not to understand. 3 days when he'd been the conduit between Bruce and forces Ray had been too naive to recognize as deadly. Jenny had been pregnant then, just beginning to show with her first child. She'd worked as a translator for Golden Harvest, one of the few people who spoke fluent Cantonese, Mandarin, and English. When the stranger needed to communicate with Bruce, when arrangements required someone trustworthy and invisible, Ray had suggested his sister without understanding what he was really offering. Family discount, the stranger had called it, that scarred smile never wavering. Now Jenny's grandson was applying to film schools, his UCLA application essay partly inspired by Uncle Ray's fascinating career in cinema preservation. The boy had Bruce Lee posters in his bedroom and dreamed of becoming a martial arts choreographer. He saw only the romance of it all, the artistic legacy and cultural impact. He didn't know his grandfather had blood on his hands. Ray's phone buzzed again. Another message. Beautiful family your sister has. Talented grandson. It would be unfortunate if they learned how their beloved Uncle Ray helped arrange their hero's murder. The device slipped from Ray's numb fingers, clattering against the hardwood floor. The sound seemed obscenely loud in the apartment's oppressive silence. He stared at the screen's glow, understanding finally penetrating the shock that had insulated him since opening the mysterious package. This wasn't about justice or truth or even revenge. This was about control. The stranger, who was no stranger at all, Ray realized with growing horror, had been watching him for 50 years, cataloging his relationships, his vulnerabilities, his carefully constructed new identity, building a complete map of everything Ray loved so that when the moment came for collection, the leverage would be absolute. Outside, San Francisco's fog began rolling in from the bay, obscuring the city lights one by one. Ray watched it advance with the measured patience of something inevitable, something that had been approaching for decades whether he acknowledged it or not. Tomorrow he would have to return to the place where it all began. Tonight, he sat vigil over a life that was already ending, surrounded by the ghosts of films that had outlived their creators and the weight of secrets that had outlived his strength to carry them. The projector's fan hummed softly in the darkness, cooling the machine after its revelation, waiting, like everything else, for morning to come. Ray didn't sleep. He sat motionless in his chair as San Francisco's fog thickened against his windows, transforming the city into something spectral and unfamiliar. The projector had gone silent hours ago, but its presence dominated the room like an altar where he'd performed his own confession. The blank screen still glowed faintly, a white void that seemed to mock the careful boundaries he'd drawn around his new life. At 5:47 a.m., his phone rang. The sound cut through the apartment's oppressive quiet with surgical precision. Ray stared at the device where it lay on the floor, watching his sister's name illuminate the screen. Jenny never called this early. Jenny never called at all, unless something was wrong. Their relationship maintained through careful holiday visits and birthday cards that said nothing about the weight they both carried. His hand trembled as he answered. "Jenny?" "Ray." Her voice carried the tight control he recognized from their childhood, when she'd learned to speak carefully around their father's unpredictable rages. "We need to talk, now." The line went dead. Ray sat frozen, the phone cooling against his ear. Jenny's tone had carried something beyond urgency, a quality he'd heard only once before, 50 years ago, when she'd called to tell him Bruce Lee was dead, and reporters were asking questions about the film crew who'd worked his final days. 20 minutes later, she stood at his door. Jenny Chen Martinez had aged gracefully into her 70s, silver threading through hair she kept efficiently short, her frame still carrying the precise posture of someone who'd spent decades translating between languages and cultures. But this morning, exhaustion carved deep lines around her eyes, and her usually immaculate appearance showed signs of hasty assembly, mismatched earrings, lipstick applied with an unsteady hand. "You got one too," Ray said, stepping aside to let her enter. She moved past him without speaking, her gaze immediately finding the film reel still sitting on his projector. Her intake of breath was sharp, pained. "I thought we were safe." "It's been 50 years, Ray. I thought whoever—" "What did yours contain?" Jenny's purse trembled in her hands as she extracted a manila envelope, the same unmarked style that had contained Ray's reel, but instead of film, she withdrew photographs, black and white stills that showed her younger self in Golden Harvest's offices, speaking with the scarred stranger, passing documents between them with the careful discretion of someone handling dangerous information. "I don't remember these being taken," she whispered, "but there I am, clear as day, facilitating whatever he needed, just like you asked me to." Ray examined the photos with growing horror. The angles were deliberate, professional, shot with telephoto lenses from concealed positions. Someone had documented every aspect of the conspiracy, creating an archive of evidence that could destroy not just Ray and Jenny, but everyone who'd been touched by the stranger's manipulations. There was a note, Jenny continued, her voice barely audible. It said David has a bright future ahead of him. UCLA Film School, internships in Hollywood. It would be unfortunate if certain information reached his professors, his potential employers, if they learned his family had connections to Bruce Lee's death. David, Jenny's grandson, the bright-eyed kid who wanted to follow in Uncle Ray's footsteps, who saw only adventure and artistry in the film industry that had consumed their souls. The boy whose application essay had mentioned Ray's inspiring career preserving Hong Kong cinema history, never knowing that history included murder. What does he want? Jenny's question carried the exhaustion of someone who'd spent decades dreading this moment. Ray moved to his desk, picking up Bruce's photograph with reverent care. I think he wants to finish what he started. Bruce recognized him that day. I saw it in his face. They had history. And somehow, we became part of whatever game he was playing. We were children, Ray. We didn't understand. We were old enough to know better. The words came out harder than he intended, sharpened by 50 years of self-recrimination. We knew something was wrong. We felt it in the air that day, saw it in Bruce's fear. But we told ourselves it wasn't our business. We chose to look away. Jenny sank into his reading chair, the photographs scattered across her lap like evidence of a crime they'd spent decades pretending they hadn't committed. What do we do now? Before Ray could answer, his phone buzzed. Another text message, this one containing an address in Oakland and a simple instruction: bring your sister, 2 p.m. today. The past isn't finished with either of you. Ray showed Jenny the screen, watching recognition dawn in her eyes. The address was 3 blocks from her house. The stranger wasn't just demanding a meeting. He was demonstrating how completely he'd invaded their lives, how thoroughly he understood the geography of everything they loved. The fog outside had begun lifting, revealing a city that looked exactly the same as yesterday but felt fundamentally different. Ray understood with crystal clarity that whatever life he'd built in this apartment, whatever peace he'd negotiated with his conscience, had just ended forever. The past had finally come to collect its debts. Early development. Jenny stared at the phone screen for a long moment before setting it carefully on Ray's desk, her movements deliberate as if any sudden gesture might shatter what remained of their world. We don't have to go, she said, but her voice carried no conviction. We could leave the city. Take David and Maria somewhere safe. Where? Ray's laugh was hollow. He found us after 50 years of silence, Jenny. He's been watching us, planning this. He gestured toward the scattered photographs. Running would just prove we're guilty of whatever he wants to accuse us of. We're guilty. The words fell between them like stones. Jenny's facade of control finally cracked, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. We helped kill Bruce Lee. Maybe we didn't know it at the time, but we... Don't. Ray's voice sharpened. Don't say it out loud. Not here. He moved to his window, scanning the street below with new paranoia. Mrs. Wu was setting up her herb display, the same routine she'd followed for 20 years. But now every familiar face carried potential threat. Every routine seemed like surveillance. Jenny joined him at the window. Do you remember what Bruce said to me that last day? When I brought him those papers from the stranger? Ray shook his head. He'd spent decades trying to forget every detail from those final days, though they remained burned into his memory with crystalline clarity. He said, some debts follow you into the next life, Jenny. Make sure you're ready to pay them. Her reflection in the glass looked older than her 70 years. I thought he was being philosophical. You know how he was with those sayings. But Ray was remembering something else. The way Bruce's hands had shaken when he'd read whatever message Jenny had delivered. The sudden exhaustion that had seemed to settle over him like a shroud. And later, the phone call Ray had arranged. Bruce speaking in low, urgent Cantonese to the stranger, while Ray pretended to organize equipment nearby. I've done everything you asked, Bruce had said. My family is innocent. Leave them out of whatever this is. The stranger's response had been too quiet to hear clearly, but Bruce's face had gone ashen. When the call ended, Bruce had looked at Ray with something approaching pity. "You have a good heart, little brother," Bruce had said in Cantonese. "Don't let them turn it black like mine." At the time, Ray had assumed Bruce was talking about the pressures of fame, the compromises success demanded. Now he understood that Bruce had been trying to warn him. "We should call the police," Jenny said suddenly. "And tell them what? That someone's threatening us with evidence of a 50-year-old murder conspiracy involving the most famous martial artist in history?" Ray turned from the window. "They'd either think we're insane or arrest us on the spot." Jenny's phone buzzed. She checked it with trembling fingers, then showed Ray the screen. A photo of David leaving his apartment that morning, heading to his part-time job at the campus bookstore. The image was time-stamped 15 minutes ago. "He's watching David right now," Jenny whispered. "Oh God, Ray, what if he won't hurt David." "Not yet." Ray hoped he sounded more confident than he felt. "This is about control, not violence. He wants us compliant, not grief-stricken." But even as he said it, Ray remembered the precision of the punch that had sent Jackie Chan sprawling. The cold calculation in the stranger's eyes. Violence was clearly within his repertoire when it served his purposes. Jenny was dialing her phone with shaking fingers. "David? It's Grandma. Listen to me carefully, honey. I need you to come home right now. Don't ask questions, just—" Her face went white. "What do you mean someone's already there? Who's there?" She met Ray's eyes with pure terror. From the phone's speaker, David's voice carried youthful confusion. "Some guy from a film preservation society. Says he knows Uncle Ray, wants to discuss my application essay about Hong Kong cinema. He seems really knowledgeable about Bruce Lee and—" Jenny ended the call and was moving toward the door before David finished speaking. Ray caught her arm. "Wait, think about this. If we go running over there in a panic, we're playing his game exactly how he wants." But Ray's own heart was hammering. The stranger wasn't just applying pressure. He was demonstrating how easily he could reach anyone they cared about. "That's my grandson," Jenny said, her voice carrying the steel that had helped her navigate decades in a male-dominated industry. "I don't care what game he's playing." She was right, of course. The moment the stranger had involved David, all of Ray's careful calculations became irrelevant. Some lines couldn't be crossed without consequences, regardless of the cost. As they left the apartment together, Ray glimpsed Mrs. Wu watching from her store window, her usually warm expression replaced by something that looked almost like recognition, almost like fear. How long had the stranger been positioning his pieces? And how many people in Ray's carefully constructed world were already part of his design? Chapter 5, Middle Development. The 20-minute drive to Oakland stretched like hours, each traffic light a cruel delay, while David remained alone with a predator who'd orchestrated murder half a century ago. Jenny gripped the passenger seat of Ray's ancient Honda, her knuckles white as she alternated between calling David's phone, which went straight to voicemail, and staring at the photos scattered across her lap like evidence of their shared damnation. "I should have told Maria years ago," Jenny whispered as they crossed the Bay Bridge. "About what we did, about why I really left Hong Kong so suddenly after Bruce died." Ray had never heard his sister mention Maria's mother before. Their family had learned early to navigate around dangerous topics, building careful silences that protected them from each other's pain. "She thinks you came here for better opportunities." "I came here because I was terrified." Jenny's voice cracked. "After the funeral, after the questions stopped, I kept expecting someone to figure it out, to connect the translator, who'd facilitated Bruce's final meetings with the people who'd wanted him dead. I thought distance would make us invisible." But invisibility had been an illusion. Ray realized now that every birthday card sent to Jenny's grandchildren, every Christmas visit, every mention of Uncle Ray in David's college applications had been cataloged and filed away by someone with infinite patience and meticulous attention to detail. They found David's apartment building surrounded by the ordinary rhythm of college life. Students heading to classes, delivery trucks navigating narrow streets, the comfortable chaos of a university neighborhood. Nothing looked wrong, which somehow made everything feel worse. Jenny's hands shook as she used her spare key on David's front door. The apartment was silent, morning light filtering through windows that overlooked the campus where David had spent 4 years building a future that now hung in the balance. "David?" Jenny called out. No response. They moved through the small space together. Living room with its Bruce Lee posters and film equipment David had saved months to afford. Kitchen still showing signs of his rushed breakfast preparation. Everything appeared normal until they reached the desk where David worked on his film projects. The computer was still on, displaying an email composition screen. The recipient line showed an address David had never seen before. The subject read, "Re, my family's connection to Bruce Lee." The message body was empty except for a single line of typing. Uncle Ray and Grandma Jenny were there the day Bruce Lee died. They helped arrange. The sentence ended mid-word, as if David had been interrupted. Jenny sank into the desk chair, staring at the screen with growing horror. He made David write this, forced him to start typing out our confession. Ray studied the apartment with new eyes, looking for signs of struggle. But there were none. Whatever had happened here had been conducted with the same surgical precision that had characterized the stranger's actions 50 years ago. No unnecessary violence, no dramatic confrontation, just the quiet application of leverage until resistance became impossible. A piece of paper lay beside the keyboard, folded once. Jenny opened it with trembling fingers, revealing a handwritten note in David's careful script. "Grandma, Uncle Ray, I'm safe for now. He says he just wants to talk to you. Says there are things about Bruce Lee you never told me. He knows about Hong Kong. He knows about the translation work. He knows everything. Please just do what he asks. I don't understand what this is about, but I can see you're both scared. I love you, David." Below David's signature, in different handwriting, an address Ray recognized with sick certainty. The old Golden Gate Fortune Cookie Factory building in Chinatown, abandoned for 15 years but still standing like a monument to better times. The stranger wasn't just summoning them to a meeting. He was bringing them home to where their shared guilt had first taken root. Jenny folded the note carefully, her movements mechanical. He's going to destroy David's future, even if we give him whatever he wants. David will never look at us the same way. He'll spend the rest of his life knowing his family helped murder his hero. The weight of that realization settled over Ray like a physical thing. They'd spent 50 years protecting their families from the truth, building new lives on foundations of careful silence. But secrets had their own gravity, their own demands for acknowledgement. The stranger wasn't just exposing their past crimes, he was forcing them to contaminate everything they'd tried to keep pure. Ray's phone buzzed. Another message, this one containing a photo of David sitting in what looked like the cookie factory's old office space, unharmed but clearly frightened. Below the image, a simple text, 3 p.m. Come alone, both of you. No police, no backup plans. Just two old accomplices ready to finish what we started in 1973. Jenny met Ray's eyes with the resigned expression of someone who'd finally stopped running from inevitable judgment. Outside David's window, Oakland stretched toward the bay, where San Francisco waded across dark water, the city where they'd built their careful lies, now summoning them home to face the truth. They had 4 hours to decide how much they were willing to sacrifice to save what remained of their family's innocence. The answer, Ray realized with growing dread, was everything. Chapter 6. Plot twist. The silence in David's apartment felt like accusation itself, pressing against Ray's chest as he stared at the half-typed confession on the computer screen. 4 hours until they faced the stranger who'd orchestrated their lives for 5 decades. 4 hours to prepare for whatever final act he'd been planning since Bruce Lee's last breath. "We need to know what we're walking into," Ray said, his voice steadier than he felt. "There's something I never told you about that day, Jenny. Something Bruce said right before—" His phone rang, the sudden sound making them both jump. Unknown number, but Ray recognized the area code from Hong Kong. His hand hesitated over the device. "Answer it," Jenny whispered. "If we're going to die today, I want to know why." Ray swiped to accept the call, putting it on speaker. Raymond Chen. The voice was aged but unmistakably familiar. Cultured British accent tinged with Cantonese inflection. Sir Richard Blackwood, former head of Shaw Brothers International Distribution, the man who'd negotiated Bruce Lee's final contracts. "Richard?" Ray's throat constricted. He hadn't spoken to Blackwood in 30 years, not since the older man had fled Hong Kong under a cloud of financial scandal. How did you... I've been following the news from San Francisco. Certain packages being delivered. Old footage surfacing. Blackwood's laugh was bitter. I wondered when our friend would finally play his endgame. I'm calling to tell you that everything you think you know about 1973 is wrong. Jenny leaned closer to the phone, her face pale. What do you mean wrong? The stranger, the one who's been pulling your strings all these years, his name is Vincent Zhao. He wasn't just some mysterious figure working for Bruce's enemies. He was Bruce's business partner, his secret business partner. The words hit Ray like a physical blow. He remembered the phone conversation he'd overheard. Bruce's desperate tone. I've done everything you asked. My family is innocent. That's impossible, Jenny said. Bruce would never... Bruce was broke, my dear. Golden Harvest was hemorrhaging money on his American ambitions. The insurance companies were balking at his stunt work. He needed capital desperately, and Vincent offered it, in exchange for a very specific arrangement. Ray's mind raced, recontextualizing every memory from those final weeks. The stranger's easy access to the sets. Bruce's visible stress that had nothing to do with filming pressures. The way crew members had deferred to the stranger without question. Vincent was financing Bruce's films, Blackwood continued, but with a unique clause in their contract. If Bruce died during production, Vincent would inherit not just the insurance payouts but the rights to Bruce's image, his fighting techniques, his entire legacy. Worth hundreds of millions in today's money. Jenny's voice was barely a whisper. Bruce knew? Bruce thought he could control it. Use Vincent's money to establish himself in Hollywood, then buy back his freedom. But Vincent had different plans. He'd been documenting everything. Every meeting, every transaction, every person who unknowingly facilitated the arrangement. Building an archive of accomplices he could manipulate if anyone ever got too curious about the circumstances of Bruce's death. The photographs scattered across Jenny's lap suddenly took on new meaning. Not evidence of their guilt, but proof of their manipulation. They hadn't helped murder Bruce Lee. They'd helped Vincent Zhao murder his business partner while making it look like natural causes. The footage he sent you, Ray said, understanding flooding through him. Jackie taking that punch. Was Vincent testing his plan, seeing if he could create a convincing accident on set. Jackie was never the target. He was the rehearsal. Ray felt 50 years of self-hatred cracking like ice in spring. They'd been teenagers following orders from adults they trusted, not accomplices to premeditated murder. Vincent had used their youth, their respect for authority, their desire to belong in Bruce's world. But why now? Jenny asked. Why surface after 50 years? Blackwood's pause carried the weight of terrible knowledge. Because Vincent is dying, cancer, and he's decided his legacy should be the truth about Bruce Lee's death, with you and Ray as his scapegoats. He's spent decades positioning you as the perfect fall guys. The film he's preserved, the documentation he's maintained, it all points to two vulnerable teenagers who allegedly conspired with Bruce's enemies. Ray's phone buzzed with another text, a photo of David, still unharmed but looking increasingly frightened. Below it, a message that now read like pure arrogance. Your young friend is eager to hear the truth about his heroes. I'm looking forward to enlightening him about what his family really is. Vincent thinks he's rewriting history, Ray said, understanding Vincent's fatal flaw with crystal clarity. But he doesn't understand the one thing that really matters. Jenny looked at him with desperate hope. What? David isn't going to remember us as the people who helped kill Bruce Lee. Ray's voice carried new strength, 50 years of guilt transforming into protective fury. He's going to remember us as the people who finally exposed Bruce's real murderer. Vincent Zhao had made one crucial error. He'd assumed that shame would paralyze them forever. He'd never considered that the truth, even terrible truth, could become a weapon in the right hands. They had 3 hours to turn the hunter into the hunted. Chapter 7. Climax build up. The old Golden Gate fortune cookie factory loomed in Ray's memory like a temple of lost innocence, its red brick facade weathered by decades of fog and neglect. He'd worked there summers during high school, learning patience from elderly women who folded wishes into brittle shells. Now it would be the place where 50 years of carefully constructed lies finally collapsed. We need recording equipment, Jenny said, her transformation from frightened grandmother to protective matriarch complete. If Vincent wants to confess his crimes to David, we make sure the whole world hears it. Ray was already moving toward David's film equipment, his hands steady for the first time in days. David's got professional audio gear, digital, cloud backup. Vincent's old school, he won't think about wireless transmission. They worked with the desperate efficiency of people who'd spent decades avoiding this moment, only to discover they were more prepared than they'd ever imagined. Jenny found David's smallest recording device, no bigger than a thumb drive. Ray tested the battery life and range. Their movements carried the coordination of siblings who'd learned to survive by watching each other's backs. "I keep thinking about Bruce's last words to me," Ray said as he taped the device inside his jacket collar. "He said not to let them turn my heart black. I thought he meant the industry, the compromises, but he was warning me about Vincent specifically." Jenny paused in checking her phone's recording app. "What else did Bruce say that day, after I delivered that message?" Ray's memory, polished by 50 years of guilty repetition, offered up details he'd never shared. He talked about legacy, said the worst thing wasn't dying young, it was having your death serve someone else's purpose. I thought he was being philosophical, but he already knew what Vincent was planning. Then why didn't he stop it? Why go along with any of it? The question Ray had never dared ask himself. But now, with Vincent's true nature exposed, the answer felt obvious. Because Vincent had leverage, something that made Bruce feel trapped, maybe threats against his family, maybe financial ruin. Vincent's had 50 years to perfect his manipulation techniques. Imagine how persuasive he was when Bruce was desperate. Jenny's face hardened with understanding, like he's doing to us now, using David to force compliance. They left David's apartment carrying weapons Vincent couldn't see: truth, technology, and the righteous fury of grandparents whose family had been threatened. The drive back to Chinatown felt different now, not a journey toward judgment but toward justice finally delayed too long. The familiar streets of Ray's neighborhood looked strange in afternoon light, shadows falling differently across the places where he'd built his careful exile. Mrs. Wu's store, the herb shop where he bought tea, the restaurant where he ate dinner most nights. All of it suddenly felt like a stage set Vincent had been arranging for this final performance. There, Jenny pointed to a figure standing outside the cookie factory's entrance. "Is that him?" Ray's blood chilled with recognition. Vincent Zhao looked exactly as he had 50 years ago. Still tall, still imposing, still carrying himself with the quiet authority that had made teenage Jenny and Ray eager to please. Only his hair had gone white, his face carved with lines that spoke of decades spent nurturing patience. "He hasn't changed," Ray whispered. "How is that possible?" "Because he's been feeding on our guilt all these years," Jenny replied with bitter insight. "Staying young while we aged with shame." They parked 2 blocks away, giving themselves time to approach on foot and activate their recording equipment. Ray's heart hammered as he tested the device one final time. David's voice would soon be preserved forever, but so would Vincent's confession. The afternoon fog was rolling in from the bay, wrapping the abandoned factory in mist that made everything feel dreamlike and insubstantial. Perfect weather for ghosts to finally speak their truth. "Whatever happens in there," Jenny said as they walked the final block, "David needs to know we love him, that we never wanted any of this to touch his life." Ray thought about the young man who'd grown up hearing stories about Uncle Ray's modest adventures in Hong Kong cinema, never knowing those adventures had been purchased with blood. David's innocence was about to be destroyed, but perhaps something stronger would take its place: the knowledge that his family had ultimately chosen courage over self-preservation. Vincent saw them coming and smiled with genuine warmth, as if greeting old friends after too brief an absence. The expression was somehow more terrifying than any display of obvious menace. "Raymond, Jennifer, thank you for coming. I've been so looking forward to finishing our conversation." Behind him, through the factory's broken windows, Ray caught a glimpse of David sitting in the shadows, alive and unharmed but clearly confused about why his beloved family members looked like they were walking toward their own execution. The moment of truth had arrived, and Ray realized that Vincent's greatest mistake hadn't been underestimating their capacity for resistance. It had been giving them time to remember who they'd been before guilt taught them to be ashamed of their own shadows. #Chapter 8, Climax. Vincent's smile faltered the moment he saw their faces, not the broken expressions of defeated accomplices he'd been cultivating for 50 years, but the steady determination of people who'd finally stopped running from their own shadows. "You look different," he observed, his voice carrying the first note of uncertainty Ray had ever heard from him. Almost relieved. "We had an interesting phone call this afternoon," Jenny said, stepping forward with the protective instinct that had made her a formidable grandmother. "From someone who remembers 1973 very differently than you've been telling us." Vincent's composure cracked slightly, revealing something predatory beneath the cultured facade. "Richard Blackwood, I assume. That old fool never understood the bigger picture. Bruce Lee was a shooting star, destined to burn out. I simply ensured his light would serve a lasting purpose." Ray felt the recording device against his collar capture every word, insurance against whatever Vincent had planned. Through the factory window, David's confusion was transforming into growing alarm as he recognized the tension crackling between the adults he'd trusted his entire life. "You murdered your business partner," Ray said, his voice cutting through Vincent's rationalization with surgical precision. "Used 2 teenagers to help you do it, then spent 50 years making us believe we were the criminals." Vincent's laugh held genuine surprise. "Is that what you think this is about? Guilt? Justice?" He gestured toward the factory entrance with theatrical flourish. "This is about legacy, Raymond, about ensuring the truth survives when we're all gone. Your truth," Jenny corrected, "twisted into whatever serves your purpose. The only truth that matters, that Bruce Lee died because he trusted the wrong people, that his greatest admirers became his unwitting executioners." Vincent's eyes glittered with the fervor of someone who'd spent decades polishing his delusions. David deserves to know what his family really is. Ray understood Vincent's fatal flaw in that moment. The man had become so invested in his own mythology that he'd forgotten other people were capable of writing their own endings. Vincent had orchestrated everything except the possibility that his victims might stop being victims. "David!" Ray called out, his voice carrying clearly through the broken windows. "Whatever this man told you, whatever he made you believe about us, it's time you heard what really happened in 1973. Vincent moved to block their approach to the factory entrance, but his physical presence no longer carried the weight of authority it once had. He was just an aging man whose power had always depended on secrets and shame. "You'll destroy that boy's faith in everything he holds sacred," Vincent warned. "Bruce Lee, the martial arts world, your own family, all of it built on lies and blood money." "No," Jenny said with quiet finality. "We're going to show him that even good people can be manipulated by evil ones, and that it's never too late to stop running from the truth." Vincent's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the calculating predator who'd spent 50 years feeding on their guilt. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. The documentation I've preserved, the evidence I've maintained, it all points to your complicity. One word from me and David's future disappears. Your reputations, your family's standing in the community, all gone," Ray agreed calmly. "And we're finally okay with that." The admission hit Vincent like a physical blow. His entire strategy had depended on their desperate need to protect their carefully constructed lives. He'd never considered that freedom might be worth the price of exposure. David appeared in the factory doorway, his young face pale with confusion and growing dread. "Uncle Ray? Grandma? What's happening?" "This man showed me photographs, documents. He said you helped—" "We helped someone murder the man you've spent your life admiring," Ray said, the words falling like stones into still water. "We were teenagers. We thought we were following orders from people we trusted. We were wrong." Vincent stepped between them, desperation making him clumsy. "Tell him the rest, Raymond. Tell him how you translated the poison instructions, how Jennifer delivered the final dose. Tell him—" "Tell him," Jenny interrupted, her grandmother's voice cutting through Vincent's manipulation with practiced authority, "that the person who gave us those orders was the same person who's been terrorizing our family for the past week." David's eyes moved between the 3 adults, understanding beginning to dawn. "You're saying he killed Bruce Lee?" "I'm saying," Ray replied, watching Vincent's face crumble as 50 years of careful planning collapsed in real time, that he used us to do it, and he's been using our guilt to control us ever since. Vincent reached into his jacket, but his movements carried defeat rather than threat. He withdrew an old photograph, Bruce Lee laughing during a break between takes, young and alive and trusting the world around him. "I loved him too," Vincent whispered, his voice finally carrying the weight of genuine grief. "That's what made it so perfect. The betrayal, the irony." Ray realized they weren't just witnessing Vincent's downfall, they were watching a man confront the hollow core of his own existence, 50 years of elaborate revenge finally exposed as meaningless cruelty. David stepped forward, no longer the confused victim, but a young man ready to help carry his family's burden. "What happens now?" Ray looked at the recording device hidden in his jacket, at Jenny's steady presence, at David's brave face. "Now we tell the world what really happened to Bruce Lee." #Chapter 9, Resolution. The story broke 3 days later. Ray watched from his kitchen window as news vans lined the narrow streets of Chinatown, their satellite dishes reaching toward a gray October sky that reminded him of Hong Kong mornings from another lifetime. The headlines scrolled past on his phone. Bruce Lee murder conspiracy exposed after 50 years. Elderly film archivist reveals shocking truth about martial arts legend's death. Vincent Zhao arrested in connection with 1973 homicide. The recording had been clear enough. David's equipment, combined with Jenny's backup on her phone, had captured Vincent's confession with digital precision that left no room for interpretation. The FBI had been surprisingly gentle during their interviews, treating Ray and Jenny as witnesses rather than accomplices, 50-year-old victims finally able to speak their truth. Vincent had been found in his hotel room that evening, surrounded by decades of carefully maintained files, photographs, and documents that told the complete story of his manipulation. The man who'd orchestrated Bruce Lee's death and spent 5 decades nurturing others' guilt had quietly surrendered to authorities, offering no resistance when they came for him. Some kinds of defeat, Ray realized, carried their own strange peace. David knocked softly before entering, carrying 2 cups of tea and wearing the expression of someone still processing revelations that had rewritten his understanding of the world. He'd aged years in the past week, but there was something solid in his bearing now, a quality that reminded Ray of Jenny at her strongest. "The reporters are asking for another interview," David said, settling into the chair that had become his regular spot since the story broke. "They want to know how it feels to finally tell the truth." Ray considered the question, watching steam rise from his cup. How did it feel? Lighter, certainly. The weight he'd carried for 50 years hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something bearable, grief instead of guilt, sadness instead of shame. He mourned Bruce Lee's death now rather than fleeing from his own role in it. "Your grandmother called," Ray said instead. "The documentary producer wants to option her story, something about the women who were caught up in Bruce's world." David nodded, but his attention was focused on the stack of letters that had arrived over the past 3 days. Condolences from martial arts practitioners around the world, messages from film historians grateful for the truth, a few angry responses from people who preferred their heroes unblemished by complicated realities. "This one's different," David said, holding up an envelope with familiar handwriting. "It's from Jackie Chan." Ray's hand stilled on his teacup. Jackie had been unreachable since the story broke, his representatives issuing only a brief statement acknowledging his presence on set that day and expressing sympathy for Bruce's family. "What does he say?" David opened the letter carefully, his voice quiet as he read. "Raymond, I remember you, the young man who helped me to my feet after Vincent made me take that punch. I never forgot your kindness that day, or the fear in your eyes when you realized something was wrong. For 50 years, I've wondered what happened to the people who tried to help but were too young to understand what they were helping with. I'm glad you finally found your voice. Bruce would be proud of your courage. The past cannot be changed, but the truth honors his memory. Respectfully, Jackie." Ray felt tears he hadn't allowed himself in decades. Not tears of shame or regret, but something cleaner. Grief for the young man he'd been. Respect for the courage it had taken to finally speak, and gratitude for a world where even terrible truths could become bridges to redemption. "The archivist position at the Film Society," David said eventually. "They still want you to take it." They're saying your experience gives you unique insight into preserving difficult histories. Ray looked around his small apartment, at the careful life he'd built in exile from his own past, the stacks of films waiting to be cataloged, the journals filled with observations he'd been too afraid to share, the decades of knowledge he'd hoarded like a guilty secret. "Maybe," he said, "but only if you help. Your generation understands things mine never could. How to use technology to make sure stories don't get buried. How to honor complicated legacies without hiding from uncomfortable truths." David smiled, the expression carrying echoes of Jenny's fierce protectiveness and something entirely his own, a young man's readiness to help carry burdens that weren't his to bear, but were his to transform. Outside, the news vans were beginning to pack up, moving on to fresher stories. But the conversations they'd started would continue, in martial arts schools, film societies, and quiet kitchen tables where other families might finally find the courage to examine their own carefully guarded secrets. Ray had spent 30 years in this apartment, hiding from a truth that had never actually belonged to him. Vincent Zhao had stolen more than Bruce Lee's life. He'd stolen decades of authentic existence from the people he'd manipulated into unwitting complicity. But stories, Ray had learned, could be reclaimed. Truth could be excavated from even the deepest graves, and sometimes the ending you'd been afraid to write your entire life turned out to be the beginning of something better than forgiveness, understanding, acceptance, and the hard-won peace of finally coming home to yourself. The afternoon fog was rolling in from the bay, wrapping Chinatown in mist that made everything feel possible again.